Okay, cool.
I think the screen sharing is disabled.
All right, let me fix that too. Can you share now?
Try. Yep, it looks like I can't.
Yeah, I think we can see it here too. Yeah.
Cool. Can you all see the screen and everything?
Yeah.
Great. And just to confirm, what time do you all have to leave at? I know there's a lot of events today.
2:45, but I think we started about 10 minutes late, right? So 2:55 is good.
Oh,
Whatever.
it's fine. I think we're pretty flexible on timing, so whatever works for you all.
Sure.
Yeah, so hey, everybody. So I'm Sahil, and then David's also here with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about working at an early stage startup, perspectives from U.com engineers. So I know Oscar, I think, who's also involved at UVA, kind of introduced me and kind of mentioned that this is kind of like a ideathon where you all are focused on not just technical concepts, but also non-technical, kind of understanding computer science and business. So that's kind of what this talk is going to be geared towards. So we'll start off by introducing ourselves. I'll talk a little bit about what is U.com, mention a little bit of our perspectives on various career trajectories, because I know you all are kind of in university and thinking a little bit about what to do next, and then talk about what it's like to work at a startup. And I'll talk about iterating and building a product using U.com as an example. And I'll hand it off to David. He'll talk about our open platform, and we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So always feel free to ask questions, even when we're presenting. You can always, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt, but I'll also leave time at the end so you all can ask any questions you may have. So I'll introduce myself. So I'm Sahil. I'm an engineer at U.com. At U.com, I've been focusing on building search and ranking systems. David, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm a software engineer at U.com. Previously, I was a student at the University of Waterloo for like the whole of 1 year. At U.com, I'm working on our open platform pretty much, and just a bunch of front-end stuff.
Cool. So I guess the first thing you might be wondering is, what is U.com? So U.com, we're a search engine that summarizes the best parts of the internet for you without ads and with great privacy. So we have two modes. We have a personal mode and a privacy mode. And our privacy mode, we take privacy very seriously. And in our personal mode, we actually allow for personalization and allow you to find the most relevant results from the web and apps that you can sort and prioritize for an optimum search experience. So the word apps is kind of the key word here because we're building an app platform, and I'll show some examples that'll kind of make this a little bit more clear. But ultimately, we believe that you should control your search, your privacy, your results, and your time. And to kind of show you all what we mean. So this is, I'll just go through some queries. So this is U.com. And I'll just go through an example query. So I'm just going to look up a programming query. So you can see that this is kind of our interface, and we have these apps where you can see results. So I wrote how to sort a dictionary by value in Python, and you can see that we can find the result here. And we also have a different interface than other search engines. As you can see here, another example might be if you're doing academic research. So this is kind of a popular machine learning paper. So you can see we have an archive app where you can quickly kind of access the abstract and, kind of maybe more technical concepts, looking up recipes. This is another example of a query where we have some results. You can kind of open, you can see rich information with instructions already extracted for you. So that's kind of a brief snippet of kind of what U.com looks like. So I would encourage you all to kind of try it out and, let us know what you think. So that said, I'll kind of dive into perspectives on various career trajectories. So my sense is that you all are kind of at various stages in your undergrad and maybe grad school as well. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about what it's like to work at kind of different companies, different sizes. And obviously there's like many other trajectories depending on what you're interested in. I'm kind of gearing this more towards an industry bent because I assume that since the seminar is a lot about, products, iteration, like, startups, entrepreneurship. I'll kind of give a little bit of thoughts on that. So, I guess for me personally, so I basically started off working at Microsoft. So I've kind of worked a little bit at a big company where I was kind of focused on working on Office 365 and specifically data center operations and like data infrastructure over there. And then I've also worked at some, later stage startups, particularly in the healthcare space. I've gone to grad school, and now I've kind of joined an early stage startup where I guess now maybe we're a little bit less than early stage, we're like maybe mid stage, but when I joined it was early stage startup, which is U.com. So I have not started a company. So the one I'm probably least qualified to talk about is the entrepreneurship bucket, but I'll kind of give my thoughts a little bit so you all have a sense. So kind of when working at a big company, I'll just run through some of the pros and cons in case you all are deciding. And this is kind of advice I kind of would have given to myself when I was in college. So I hope that, maybe it's of use, and some of it probably makes sense. Some of it you may already know, but I thought I would just aggregate it over here for y'all. So I think some of the pros, there's a lot of pros of working at a big company. Don't get me wrong. So I think, one nice thing is that there's formal mentorship programs. So when I was at Microsoft, there was a ton of, programs, organized processes, and mentors that have a lot of experience from industry. And, they can kind of bring that and share that with you. I think there's a lot of organized learning opportunities. When you have a big company, there's lots of resources. This can range from partnerships with other companies that, for like education and like upskilling, to just, learning opportunities from other teammates across the company. So when you work at a big company, there's different divisions and you can kind of learn from them. I think one other nice benefit is that there's many new graduates. So, sometimes when you join big companies, they often hire a lot of new grads. So it's kind of like a cohort, which can be nice just from like a social perspective, but also from like a learning perspective. There's good processes to learn from. You can often springboard to other opportunities afterwards. Just because you started a big company doesn't mean that, you can't start a company after or work at a startup later in life, myself being an example. And it's kind of easy to evaluate the opportunity beforehand. So, there's a lot of literature and kind of reviews on kind of big companies. So you kind of know what you're getting into. And specifically, you kind of have a good sense. But there's also a bunch of cons of big companies that I found, at least. And again, this depends on the company. One is that I think, they often work at a slower pace. So because the company is so big and they often have, existing customers and use cases, often they're very slow to iterate, and oftentimes a slower pace in terms of company kind of development often leads to a slower pace of learning. At least that's what I found. There's more limited scope and responsibilities. So when you're at a big company, you often start and you own a very specific project. So when I was at Microsoft, I started, and eventually you can grow your scope, but you do start with a very small scope, which makes sense because there's already a lot of people, there's a lot of processes, and there's a lot of customers and a lot to lose essentially. So new graduates often have more limited scope and more limited responsibilities, at least to start. And then there's also more departmental silos. So when you're at a big company, you often have a very defined role. So you may be an engineer and you're probably not going to interact as much with marketing as you may at a smaller company. So those are kind of the pros and cons of a big company. And then kind of an early stage startups. These are kind of startups that can kind of range, but I would say like this is a startup that has just gotten maybe seed funding, maybe a Series A. I would consider these kind of the early stage startups, probably less than 50 people. So some of the pros over there are that, they're fast paced. So, you definitely move fast. You learn a lot because of the pace of the company growth. They can be intense, which is both a pro and a con, kind of depending on what you're looking for, your perspective. They're more flexible roles. So oftentimes at a startup, you have to kind of wear different hats and you have to be flexible because, there's none of that like defined process, and you kind of need to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. There's more interaction across departments. So, at a startup, it's not uncommon for engineers to work really closely with product and marketing and sales, depending on the business. And then I would say like the team bonding. So I think when you're at a startup, they often say that I think, diamonds form under pressure, but I think it's just true of kind of the relationships that you build with some of your coworkers, because I think you're working under, like intense circumstances. Oftentimes, like it's a good place to kind of bond with other people. And then I think another one is you grow with the company. So at a startup, and especially an early stage one, as the company grows and, your responsibilities kind of grow in step with the company because you're kind of growing along with it and you're learning along with the company as it learns what's good, what's bad. And then also mission driven. So I think a lot of startups, the people there at least are very mission driven because they're kind of joining for a purpose. So at big companies, it's often, you can also be very mission driven, but oftentimes it's a little bit more kind of practical. But yeah, that's just something I found in my personal experience. And then I think there's a bunch of cons to early stage startups as well. So one is that it's often chaotic, and I know David probably knows as well, but, when we're working at a small stage, there's so much happening. This chaos can kind of be both thrilling, but also a little nerve-wracking. So it's both a pro and a con, I would say. Lack of existing processes to learn from. So what this means is that oftentimes startups are figuring everything out. So this might be like the onboarding process might be broken. So when you're at a startup, especially an early stage one, it's kind of up to you to fix that, create better documentation so that the next person has a better process to learn from. The roles are less defined. So if you're very interested in doing something very specific and you don't really want to deviate across from that because that's exactly what you want to do, that may be kind of a con if you're at an early stage startup. I think they're probably riskier depending on the company growth. Often the company has, especially if it hasn't found product market fit yet, there's definitely like an element of risk over there. And then it's also gets harder to evaluate the opportunity beforehand. So one of the kind of things I've noticed at early stage startups is that it's hard to know exactly what it's going to be like until you're there sometimes, which makes it difficult, especially if you're kind of in your position where you're trying to decide whether to join a startup. If you kind of have to be able to judge whether or not it's going to be a good opportunity. And that's not to say it's impossible. You can definitely talk to the people there. One thing I would encourage folks to do is to kind of probably intern or maybe try to work at a startup kind of beforehand to really get a sense of whether or not it's a good match for you and then kind of dive in. But if that's not possible, just kind of talk to a lot of people at the startup, really kind of understand, what the culture is like and make sure it's a good fit for you. I think that there's a lot of variance when you come to startups. There's less variance probably at big companies. So it's really important to make sure that you kind of have a good sense of what the startup is, who the founders are, whether the culture aligns with your culture, whether the values of the startup align with your values. So there are some of the pros and cons of the early stage startup. And then, there's like the later stage startups. I would consider these to be kind of maybe Series B and on, and maybe even like bigger companies that, even if they've IPO, they may still be considered later stage startups. Maybe like Uber could be an example, although I guess they're a big company now. But some of the later stage startups, I guess it's a mix of the pros and cons listed above, depending on how late stage they are. So oftentimes, these later stage startups can have some of those really formal mentorship programs for organized learning opportunities, but they can still be really fast paced. So you might be able to get kind of like a mix of both. But yeah, I would say it's kind of like the midway between the big company and early stage. The pros and cons are probably going to be kind of on the middle of the spectrum over there. And then there's like the entrepreneurship option. So I guess this is probably for those who are, so inclined, it's probably going to be the most intense out of all these options in terms of, learning and figuring things out. And I think that's probably going to also have the most upside. And, in terms of pressure, I would say probably like the entrepreneurship option is definitely probably one of the most fast-paced, intense experiences you can have. So I haven't actually started a company, so I'm probably not the best person to comment too much on this, but from friends who have, I think they've actually learned a lot from doing it. Although in this case, you're the one kind of coming up with, the processes, and you're really learning from yourself and kind of what you can do. So you have to have like the confidence to be able to do it. And then there's education. So, I went to grad school. I also think that's like a great option for folks. And there's also probably a whole other range of buckets. But anyways, that's just like a couple of perspectives on different career trajectories based on my experiences, at least. And we can definitely talk more in the Q&A if you all have specific questions about any of these. So what is it like to work at a startup? And I kind of mentioned this already, but I think one, nice thing is that it's mission driven. So at U.com, we're kind of on a mission to create, the best search engine that will save you time, allow you to control your sources, and kind of get the best information. We want to summarize the web and really make the internet a better place for everybody. They're fast paced. So I think speed of iteration is important. I think at a startup, especially if you haven't found product market fit yet, you want to kind of iterate really fast, get things in the hand of users, and keep improving. This obviously does depend on the domain. So if you're a healthcare company and you're kind of building a blood testing device, I'm not going to mention any names, but you probably want to be careful before you release to users, and maybe like you want to have a higher check on quality. Speed is still important in terms of development, but in terms of iteration with users, you probably don't want to be doing that too much. But if you're at a consumer company like ours, speed of iteration is important. And you want to get things in the hand of the users and keep iterating. So in general, startups are very fast paced. You wear many hats. So, this is going to be everything from dealing with vendors to, doing it. So if you're an engineer, you might have to talk to vendors. You might have to kind of negotiate a contract. You may need to kind of still be building things from scratch. You may even kind of be interacting with marketing to make sure that they're best communicating the work that you've done to users. And then kind of adapting to change. So as the company grows or pivots, at a startup, it's kind of important to adapt accordingly. So kind of being willing to, I think, change is something that I found to be like a really important heuristic to have, especially at startups. I think big companies, things probably change a little bit less quickly, mostly because they've already found product market fit and they have an existing user base. But when you're a startup and you're trying to find all of this from scratch, you need to be willing to really adapt to changing circumstances. And then listening and learning from users. I think that's really important for everybody. So even if you're like an engineer, even if you're a marketing person, even if you're in product, or you're, a salesperson, like everybody at the company needs to be listening and learning from users, because it's kind of so important and it's so foundational, kind of the stuff you're doing, especially at those early stages. And then it's exciting. So I think, you find different challenges every day. And again, I think this depends on the startup, but I would say that, when you're kind of building something from 0 to 1, or even kind of iterating on it, I think it can be really exciting to kind of see things change and be responsible for some of those changes. So now that I've kind of talked a little bit about, U.com, general kind of perspectives on career trajectories and some of the attributes of working at a startup, I'll kind of go through an example with U.com. So I think one of the learnings that we had is that usually when you're building something, you want to start somewhere. So, and I'll kind of just guide you through a little bit of how U.com has evolved over time to give you a sense of how we tend to iterate and like how iteration is important when building a product from scratch. So our problem was we wanted to build a search engine, and building a search engine is hard. There's existing players. Everybody uses search already. There's the very dominant player, Google, and that's probably has the vast majority of the market share right now. And it's a very large space. The surface area touches probably so much of what we do, whether you're searching for, a standing chair or a standing desk, rather, a chair to sit on, headphones, looking up, what date is it, how to convert something from bytes to terabytes. There's a whole range of, things that we use search for. It's kind of like almost so common to us. It's kind of like drinking water. So we have to start somewhere. So what we did was we started with focusing on one specific shopping experience to really understand our users. And I'll just kind of show you this because I think it's fun to kind of see how products evolve over time. But we actually started. So when I joined the company, we were working on something called besthomeoffice.com. And what this was is basically we were trying to figure out how to create a good search experience by focusing on one specific domain. So within shopping, we were thinking about kind of, things that people buy for a home office, because this is also during COVID. So at the time, people were buying a lot of these things. And I remember I was joining at first and I was confused. So I was like, oh, aren't we building a search engine? But when I talked to Richard, our founder, he kind of mentioned that we do need to start somewhere and be focused and really learn from users as fast as we can. And kind of a lot of the stuff we learned from building besthomeoffice.com really kind of were kernels that kind of drew into kind of our later products and kind of seeded some of the app platform that we had later on. And just to kind of give you a sense, this is actually, let's see if I can, share what this looks like. So you can see over here, we had this website where if you can click on it, you can kind of see that we had a description of, for example, a perfect standing desk, which we had sourced from an expert. And then we had these tiles over here, which we would kind of get from different sources. And you can see that they have rich experience with a lot of extracted content, summarization, and some of those AI powered features. And then at the bottom, we have kind of your traditional web results. So we obviously have iterated and kind of our product doesn't look anything like this anymore, but there are some kernels that we learned. So one thing we learned was that people do like rich content. So for example, this content over here, this kind of was maybe was later kind of turned into some of the tiles that we see on U.com, which kind of I showed a little bit at the beginning. But yeah, so I think once we had that, kind of the next example of an iteration would be, so now that we had kind of built something, we now kind of were kind of, arriving more at a search engine. So now we can kind of take any query and show similar information. So this query was best laptops. So you can see that we now have, rich content corresponding to links and web pages. So over here, you can kind of scroll through in our side panel for a tile, and you can go and you can kind of see information about laptops faster than you would be able to on Google. So this was kind of something we did, and we were really focused on shopping at the time. And you can also see that we have Reddit at the bottom, a little peek at the thing. So, community forums are important. So over here, we're kind of learning that people, when they're buying products, really like to learn from other people. A lot of people don't trust all these sites that are kind of SEO'd, and Google kind of shows a lot of ads. So we kind of differentiate by not having ads as well. So this is kind of maybe I would say kind of a subsequent iteration compared to the first one. And it's more in line with what you would typically consider to be a search engine. And you can see over here a similar example for best headphones. So now you can see that our product is actually a little bit less limited. So over there, we had a best home office, and we had specific categories that we were kind of focusing on, but now we're kind of surfacing any query, whether it's best headphones, best laptops, best water bottles, whatever. We are trying to be able to come up with automated approaches to provide good content. And then this is an example of another iteration where we kind of really focus on developers. So over here, you can see the query is revert git commit. And we're basically showing a Stack Overflow app where we have a bunch of rich content, similar to the content we had for, desks and headphones a while back. We now have done it for developer queries. And you can see a snippet over here where you can kind of immediately get the command and copy it and then use it in your, developer workflow if you're an engineer. So one of the things about, so I think over here, we actually learned a lot about being really good for engineers. And we have an experience called UCode that a lot of developers use that kind of make them more efficient at their job, especially when they're coding. And if you're a kind of a student and you're, doing, CS homework or kind of just building a product, I would encourage you to kind of try out UCode or U.com and just do coding queries, because that's kind of one of the experiences that we've really focused on. And then we've kind of even gone beyond that. So now we kind of have this whole host of what we call AI apps. So this is an example of ViewWrite. So over here, this is basically an AI writing tool. So the idea is that you can kind of put a message and it'll automatically generate text for you. So in this message, we say like an essay about the importance of iterating at a startup. And then our UWrite tool kind of automatically said this. The most important thing about a startup, or most important thing for a startup, is iterate. This means that the company should constantly be trying new things and making changes based on feedback. This allows the company to learn what works and what doesn't, and ultimately create a product or service that people want. Without iteration, startups will never reach their full potential. And I thought this is great. So I actually didn't write any of this. This is all written from the UWrite, and it's kind of in line with the talk, which is why I had chosen this prompt. So that's kind of one other addition that we've added is these AI apps. This is another example, a very recent one. And this is partially, thanks to David as well, who worked a lot on this. But this is a kind of a Stable Diffusion AI image generator. So over here, you can see that I just typed in a query, monkey playing the guitar on the moon, and then click generate Stable Diffusion image. And you can see that this is an image of a monkey playing guitar on the moon. So this is all like the apps within our search ecosystem. And you might be wondering, how does this kind of fit into search? That's something we're actually still figuring out as well, but we have a lot of ideas about how to kind of pull in a lot of these recent advances in AI into our product. And we're going to keep iterating until we get it just right, basically. And you can see now, so now we'll kind of, from what we had before, we have like a bunch of apps and we're kind of constantly trying to increase the number over there. So that said, kind of like the next example would be all the apps I've shown over here are mostly apps that we've built ourselves. So we've done this by like indexing the web, developing our own search, developing our own UI from ourselves. And now we kind of are having this idea of like the open platform, which I'll hand it off to David to talk a little bit about, which will allow other people to build apps on U.com and really take us like even a step further.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to pull up my slides, Sahil?
Yep.
Thank you. Cool. So I'm going to keep this short because we're kind of running out of time, and I have a feeling we might need some time for Q&A. So let's just keep it simple. I've tried to make this from like a very businessy perspective because I'm pretty sure this event's being run like inside the business school. Anyways, so what is the open platform? So basically all the ideas we have, like you guys did today, our goal is to actually eventually take those and turn them into functioning search apps that show up in our search results. So basically open platform is a tool that you can use to easily build search apps on U.com. So if you looked at all the apps that we had that Sahil showed before, those were made by us. And that's not exactly the most efficient way to serve results when you have like millions of searches going on. And they all range from like a broad spectrum of topics. So the easiest way for us to cover all of those topics and have apps or everything is to not actually build them ourselves. It's to have people who are interested in having like a good search experience build it. So the power of the open platform is that you can easily build your own apps, even if you've only taken like an intro to CS course or whatever. So basically this allows us to democratize a search engine. So you're not constrained by SEO or search engine optimization. I don't know if they teach that in marketing or not, but like those tactics are really spammy. People basically just put a crap ton of keywords everywhere and they expect their pages to show up on Google. But for us, we rank our apps based on how useful they are and how much users value them. And then also there's a nice added benefit where it can enable revenue sharing for us. Like if an app is successful and it makes money, we also make some money. There's also co-marketing, which is like a pretty big thing. Partnering with bigger apps that can get us more traffic and also having increased synergy between partnered apps. So let's just show a couple examples of what apps we can build with the open platform. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is the main app editor where you would actually build it. It's actually really simple. Most of these apps I'm about to show you took like maybe 30 lines of configuration files. Next slide, please. So this is Lauria, one of our more cooler apps. It does like AI recommended product reviews and stuff. So it takes like content from all over the internet. And this was not made by us. This was made by a third-party developer. And it's now on our search, like our search engine. If you go search for best headphones or something. Next. Thank you. This is Listen Notes. It's like a podcast search app. So that's like one area where we were missing like indexing everything. Like we didn't really have a good source of podcasts, but they came in, they were like, hey, we have a good API, like a good source for data. And we want to have results behind your search platform. And then it took them about 2 days, and this was boom, right on our search engine. Next, please. Archive, we basically rebuilt our own archive app with the open platform just to see if we could, and kind of worked. SQL Complete. This is probably going to be a interesting one for anyone who actually has finished like homework for their CS classes. This can pretty much take any prompt for like a SQL command and it will just generate the code for it. Stable Diffusion, which we saw earlier. I did one that was kind of UVA themed based on one of my favorite artists. This was also built with the open platform and took about 2 hours total. Next, please. And the last one is Lexico, which is like a stable diffusion search engine. Again, this is like a part where tactically we were missing certain resources and we couldn't really serve the same experience to our users as other people could. But by partnering with someone who could have these resources and the data set for that, and they built an open platform app, then suddenly we're able to cover this large market that's suddenly become very hot. And yeah, so with all of these apps, I think you can really see the power of the open platform and how we can sort of move forwards and democratize the search experience by allowing pretty much anyone to build an app on a search engine.
Cool. And I guess I have a question for David. How, if somebody wanted to build a open platform app, how should they go about doing it?
As of right now, there's like a interest form. If you go to about.u.com/developers, I think we're basically taking submissions right now. So if you have an idea, or if you know something just suddenly pops up in your mind for like a cool app you want to build, you can go to the link. I just sent in the Zoom chat. I don't know, Oscar might email it out later or something. I don't know. But basically you can submit your idea. And then once we get to the stage where we can have more and more apps supported, we'll get back to you via email.
Cool. And if you have an ideathon idea, you can actually probably apply as well.
Or like if it's good enough, we might just take it and do it ourselves and you'll get credit for that.
Cool. So that's actually all the content we had. We wanted to keep it a bit light on content because we want to focus on what's most useful to you.
Oh, he's done. Perfect.
Yeah, I'll open it up to Q&A. And again, feel free to ask about anything. It doesn't have to be related to U.com, startups. It could be about random topics, career advice, machine learning, anything that you're interested in that you think we can kind of provide some perspective on. Oh, I think there's people in the chat. Oh, okay, their mic isn't working right now. I thought it was just silence. Yeah, feel free to type questions if the mics aren't working. Okay, so Sylvie has a question regarding the AI code completion. How does U.com's code completion compare to others such as GitHub Copilot? Yeah, this is a great question. I would say it's quite similar. So you could see like the results will be, yeah, like we're basically trying, what we're trying to do that's different is really take some of these techniques that, you know, GitHub is using and different people are using, like OpenAI, and really open it up to the masses and make it a lot more accessible. So I think the differentiator here really isn't probably the quality of the code completion yet. It's more so the accessibility to it within search. So you can easily use it. So yeah, you can try it out for yourself and kind of see how it works. So Jade has a question. What would you tell your college self knowing what you know now about all your different experiences? Yeah, this is a good question. So I would say that, I think one thing I would probably tell myself, and this is partially, why, I had kind of created that other slide about perspectives on different career trajectories, is that I think a lot of times you don't really know what you know until you've done it. So I think it's important to try something out. And it kind of just is the same way you iterate on a product. I think it's just important, I would tell myself, to iterate on like your interests and your career as well. So, for me, a lot of it has been iteration. So I've kind of worked at different companies, gone to grad school, and I feel like I've seen everything as an iteration that is slowly allowing me to kind of learn more about myself, and kind of about, what I want to contribute to the world. So I would say, like, I wouldn't worry too much about things being too final. I know kind of maybe it's stressful, especially finding that first job or first internship. But what I would tell myself is not to worry too much about it and just to view it as one iteration, because you're going to keep iterating for the next, I don't know, for the rest of your life. So that's what I would tell myself. That would probably make me calm down a bit, I guess. I don't know if people are nervous or stressed about different things. So Sylvie has another question saying, if U.com does not take into account SEO, how are search results ranked? And how does U.com intend to gain more market share? Yeah, this is a great question. So right now, like, we've kind of built a combination. So we actually are relying on some third parties. So these third parties, so David actually mentioned a couple examples of third parties that are kind of, they own their apps and kind of do their own ranking themselves. And, they kind of are incentivized to do the best ranking that will help their app, which is hopefully in line with the user's experience as well. But in general, like, we kind of do take control of certain aspects of our ranking, and we try to do what is kind of best to improve kind of the satisfaction of the user. So we do try to, at least in our personal mode, kind of understand what types of rankings really kind of satisfy our users. And we do a lot of work on ranking to kind of, increase that metric essentially. So we're not really trying to like increase a metric that's aimed at, making money from users. We're really trying to increase a metric about like user satisfaction essentially. And it says, how does U.com intend to gain more market share? So that's also a great question. I think it's kind of an open question, but I think it's going to be a mix of advertising and kind of making our product even better. So we're going to continue iterating on our product, and we're going to kind of do a lot of focus on marketing. So one example is like, if you're in the SF, I guess you're not in SF because you're in Virginia, but we had some billboards, for example. But we have a marketing team who's really focused on kind of like doing a bunch of marketing on different forums, whether it's like Reddit or different platforms that kind of show off, how, U.com can help you. Sri Lakshmi has a question. My question would be, where do you see U.com in 10 years? Do you think about adding apps that Google has like email and Drive? David, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. In 10 years, obviously the big goal is to, well, the reason why we're like a Series A startup is because the investors see our potential to sort of grow exponentially within the next couple of years, forget even 10 years. So by 10 years, we would hope that we'd be like at least a strong competitor to Google. I don't think anyone can really take over Google's market share within the next decade just because of how entrenched they are and the kind of moat they have, especially with all their other services. But then the follow-up question was like adding apps that Google has, like email and Drive. I can't speak to the long-term strategy of that because I don't think we have put too much effort into adding things like that. But they're one of the reasons why Google has such like a strong grip over the search industry, because it's so well connected with their other apps. So obviously, if you want to compete and really sort of take over Google's market share one way or another, you're going to have to figure out how to get rid of that moat. And that could be by adding apps like email and Google Drive.
Yeah, and one other comment there is that, part of the idea of the open platform is that we're kind of more open than Google. So Google kind of has an incentive to promote Gmail, Google Drive, but there's also a great host of other services out there, whether it's like Outlook, Share, like OneShare, or what's called Share Drive. Or
Skiff is a pretty big one too. I don't know if you heard of them.
Yeah, so the idea is that we're an open platform, and we can hopefully be kind of very focused on the user experience as opposed to promoting kind of our other non-search products, because we are a search company and that's what we're focused on. Sylvie has Alex has a question. As someone interested in math, I was wondering if there are teams behind the design of the algorithm that's not software/AI based, people who try to come up with something like PageRank, and if so, how do you prepare yourself in college for that kind of role? That's a great question. So I think, I think math is kind of a good thing to be interested in. It's kind of fundamentally useful when it comes to, engineering and machine learning in particular and AI. So right now, I think, as an early, at our stage, we do have, like, everybody's kind of involved in engineering, even the folks who are kind of more on the machine learning side of the house, like myself. So I do spend a lot of time. So I do spend some time doing machine learning work, but a lot of the time is really kind of implementing and kind of iterating and trying out different algorithms. And I think what you're referring to is kind of more of like a research type role. And I think that's something that like we will have as we grow. And even now we do have a lot of discussions that are very research oriented and trying to think about, okay, how do we replace PageRank, for example? What can we do over there? And I think if you're interested in those types of role, your question is, how do you prepare yourself in college for that kind of role? I would say you're already doing a good job by being interested in math. I would kind of do that, keep doing that, keep kind of driving down on the fundamentals in college. I think it's harder to take the time to really go deep into subjects like, modern algebra or like, convex optimization outside of college. So, when you're in college, I would kind of take advantage of being in that academic system to really learn about kind of those technical topics. But I would also take time to do research. So one thing I would recommend is doing research. This could be kind of like working with a professor. So at Stanford, I kind of gained a lot personally by doing research in the Stanford Machine Learning Lab. And I'm sure like UVA has kind of their own labs that are probably great with amazing professors and grad students over there. So I would definitely suggest like working with them if you're interested in kind of these research type roles. Amrit has a question. With U.com's focus on personalization, how do you plan on addressing the issue of bubbles where people are only exposed to their own or similar beliefs and are not engaging with other ideas? Yeah, so I think Amrit asks a great question. So right now with personalization, the way it works is we basically allow you to prefer certain sources. So for example, if you like the New York Times, you can kind of upvote that and then we'll try to kind of incorporate that more in your results. I think one thing that we have to be careful of is bubbles. This is something we do think very deeply about, and we've had like vigorous debates at the company as well on the topic of filter bubbles and like what our role is in that. I think people should have, like, I think we think that people should have some control over their sources in a way that Google doesn't give you, but we also want to make sure that people are still exposed to other ideas. And I think a lot of it will come down to making sure that we kind of balance personalization with kind of our other value of kind of facts. So kind of our three biggest values are trust, facts, and kindness. So kind of thinking a lot about facts as well, and kindness is going to be important if we allow the users to trust us with personalization and with also seeing kind of other information. And I guess that's not really an answer to your question. I think it's more of an ongoing question. And I think it'll be kind of a series of small, like detailed decisions we make. But I think everything's going to be in line with those values. David, I don't know, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the way our personalization works right now is that it's harder for someone to personalize like certain, like, I don't know, political views or something, because the way it works is we have like certain apps that you can upvote or downvote, and those aren't usually very polarized. They're just like sets of sources. So it's harder for like someone to sort of personalize results such that they kind of form themselves in a bubble. Like it would probably take a very long time for someone to be able to do that across all the different searches and sources they could make. But in the future, we're definitely going to have more detailed discussions about how to prevent that as a whole. Yeah.
Cool. I think we're about 5 minutes over. So I guess we can wrap it up. But yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to email either me or David. So my email is sahil@u.com. And then David's email is just david@u.com. So definitely email us if you have any questions about anything, whether it's related to u.com or not. I mean, you can also find us on Twitter and LinkedIn at the following links. All right. Thanks, folks.
All right. Bye, everyone.